Ever since Trae Young got in the NBA, he has been the most disrespected All-Star I have ever seen. And this year, it is no different. Each year, and a lot of years that he's been in the NBA, he has literally been putting up All-Star numbers. And this year, he has been putting up better numbers than a few other people who's on the All-Star team, in my opinion. And the fact that he is not on it, not even considered to be on it, not even a backup, is nothing short but just incredulous. It is a robbery. It is broad day. You're not paying attention to the way this guy plays. You're not paying attention to how efficient he is. You're not paying attention to anything that he does on the court, probably because his team sucks. And listen, I understand that winning does cure all. Winning has a lot to do with how you're going to be perceived. But at the end of the day, you cannot tell me that Trae Young is the reason why this team is losing. The reason why this team is losing is because that this team simply just does not have the best roster for them to win. I mean, right now we're talking about how they're going to blow it up. That should already tell you that the roster wasn't that good anyway. This roster is filled with salvageable parts here and there, but at the end of the day, this is not a playoff team. This is not even a championship team, and you're barely making it as a play-in team. But regardless, Trae Young is willing them, carrying them on his back to make sure that he can get them into the play-in at best. But the reality is, it's really difficult when you have a team that sucks. But even still, he's averaging some of the best numbers that you can have as a guard. He's averaging 10 assists a game with 20-something points. You cannot ask a person to do that and not have them be considered an all-star. I mean, when you just look at the numbers, averaging 27 points, 11 assists, you're looking at an all-star elite caliber player. There's only a few other players who, in my eyes, can even rival those numbers in terms of being a playmaker, being able to get his teammates involved, and that's really Luka Doncic. And Luka Doncic is a whole nother level above Trae Young. But that's really the only other person. Maybe even the Tyrese Halliburton is probably the closest one to Trae Young. But the point still stands because those two players that I named are all-stars, right? And that is apropos because they deserve to be all-stars. They deserve to be in this category. They deserve to be in the All-Star Weekend, especially with the All-Star Weekend coming up. This is a very important subject to even talk about because year after year, as Trae Young is continually robbed and barely being put on the team, there is one person this year who's on the All-Star team who really should not be in place of Trae Young, because we've always talked about, well, if we're going to say a person got snubbed, we have to take out one other person. And usually year after year, I can't really make the argument because there's a lot of great players on that list and who's having really, really good seasons. But right now, Damian Lillard is not having a great season. And Damian Lillard, in my eyes, is taking away the shine, the all-star opportunity that Trae Young should rightfully have. And listen, this is coming from a Damian Lillard fan. I love Damian Lillard's game. He's still a great player in my eyes. But this is no doubt a down year for him. Even though the Bucks are 30-13, if it was just him, I don't know where they would be right now. And we have seen what happens when he leaves the team and is just by himself. It's not really that good. But even with all that, right, because we can't take away Giannis and his genius and how the way he can impact the floor. This just has been a very up and down year for the Bucks. I mean, they just fired their head coach after they were 30-13 and has won one game out of the three with Doc Rivers, who, I mean, to be expected because one, it is Doc Rivers, but also you're going to take some time to learn the system that Doc Rivers is trying to implement. But throughout all of that, Damian Lillard has been struggling. I mean, and if you look at the games, maybe the scoreboard doesn't show it, but if you look at the games, defense-wise, Damian Lillard's having one of the worst seasons he's ever had. But also, if you're looking at the games when you're watching him on offense, it's not very smooth as we expect him to be, as he ran his offense in Portland for many, many years. It's very disjointed. There's no real chemistry outside of the fact that you have a really, really good team without him, and if you have a lot of talent on the team, it just kind of works. And sometimes it just makes sense, especially when you have Giannis. You can space the floor out as great as you can. Damian Lillard is going to get his buckets and he's going to make sure that he scores. But is he having the best season, or at least a better season than Trae Young? And I will say absolutely not. Trae Young is doing a lot more with a lot less than Damian Lillard has. And listen, I know that Damian Lillard is going through a lot, especially in his personal life. I will not touch into that, but this is purely basketball. This is strictly on the basis of basketball. And I think that Trae Young, who's having his best season in his career, averaging 27 points and almost 11 assists, you can't ask more from that. He's averaging even more points than Tyrese Halliburton, but just one less assist if you just round up his 10.9 to 11. you're seeing somebody who's doing some remarkable things. But it always seems like his team's inability to be successful, his team's inability to win will always be counted against them. Because in my eyes, there's no reason why Damian Lillard should be on this list, especially with the season that he's had so far and what we really come to expect of him. But Trae Young has always been the guy who, if you are big, listen, Clint Capella might have some of the best big stats. I don't know. I don't check his stats. But Clint Capella has been on some teams where as long as James Harden is on the court and he breathes, Clint Capella has a double-double, right? And he's gone to the Atlanta Hawks where it is practically the same thing, okay? Pick and roll, lob, you're going to get your points. You're going to get the rebounds. I need to really check on Clint Capella's stats because I feel like he probably is a sleeper big. But that just goes to show you that Trae Young is having such a profound impact on his team where not only is he getting himself involved, because he can get himself involved, but in the best action, like the pick and roll, like the Spain pick and roll, and getting teammates involved through there, and also just simply just dotting up teammates left and right, you start to see that Trae Young really is that dynamic of a player. And that dynamic of a player deserves and demands respect, especially from their peers, from the fans, from the media outlets, because he is pretty much, there's nothing going for him. There's nobody talking about him in the media. There's nobody that's giving him props. There's nothing. There's no one. And I know for a fact that if anybody else were to average the numbers that he's averaging, that they would be considered an all-star immediately. It would be no question. Even if they're on a bad team, let's say that their team is, ninth or 10th seed. If somebody else who we've come to understand and know that they are a great player and has been revered as such, then they will be in the all-star break. And to Trae Young's credit, he's never really complained about the fact that he gets snubbed almost every single year. He's kind of always taken it on the chin, which I think honestly improves his game because you see it year after year as he gets snubbed, his game gets a lot better. And so it's a catch-22, right? He takes the disrespect and he puts it in a very positive way, positive manner, even though it's not yielding a lot of wins for his team. But at the end of the day, we should not be leveraging the fact that Trae Young being an all-star and putting up all-star numbers is just going to be something that is ignored. Damian Lillard is not putting up these numbers, and listen, he still is putting up great numbers. Don't get me wrong. He still is. Like, averaging 25 points is definitely a great stat to have. He's still able to impact the game. He's still able to shoot efficiently. That is not the issue. The issue is he having a better season than Trae Young? And then maybe we need to talk about whether or not the all-star voting system needs to be changed. I know this is something that a lot of players and a lot of fans have talked about, that maybe the popular voting is not necessarily the best thing you want when you're trying to get somebody to be an all-star break. Because if you're basically any person in the LA teams, right, you got like 5 spots already locked up because you have Kawhi, you have Paul George, you have LeBron James, you have AD, you have De'Aaron Fox. I mean, you have like so many players that's in California by proxy of California being a huge state, one of the biggest states in the United States. You're going to get a lot of votes. But if you're in, let's say, a state of Georgia where there's not that many people or not as much people, and you're not really going to get that much, media time, not that much screen time, unless you're really in the playoffs, you're not really going to get many votes. I mean, Trae Young is a favorite amongst many, many fans, but is he commanding the same respect by the same quantity of fans that other all-stars are having? No. And that's probably because of the small market team that he's in, and the fact that he is simply not in a big market, and the fact that he is simply just kind of staying out the way. He's always never really been the person to be in the spotlight like that, even though he does cherish just the moments that happen, i.e. if you were to ever see any game that he goes to New York Knicks. But at the end of the day, he still enjoys the idea of being respected and being in situations where everything is on him. And I feel like he does have the clutch gene. He has shown many times that he can be able to close out games or get a lot of teammates involved to close out those games. And so maybe we need to rethink about how we even think about the voting process for All-Star Weekend. How are we going to improve that? Because every year we have talent that is snubbed, and we always say that this person deserves to make it, but there's only so many other spots, right? And some of these spots are taken by players who are simply just having a better season, right? You could take it either way. But this year, you can't say the same thing, and I keep riding on this, but you can't say the same thing for Damian Lillard, unfortunately, especially when you compare it to Trae Young. And this is when the popularity contest simply does not work in the NBA's favor, because Damian Lillard, as great as a player he is, Trae Young is as electric as he is. He might not have the resume, he might not have the buzzer beater shot against OKC or the buzzer beater shot against Houston Rockets, but his style of game is something that a lot of people love, and it's something that a lot of people like to emulate because of his short stature and the fact that most people in the United States and most people in general are just short and probably closer to his height than the 6'5", 6'6" Goliaths that dominate in the NBA. He seems more like the exception and the outlier to the norm that we have expected in the NBA. And it's probably because he's simply just a likable guy. You know, outside if you go to New York, then that's a whole different issue. But he's a simply likable guy, and you can emulate his game a lot better and a lot easier than anything else. But at the end of the day, it's a popularity contest, and should it really be? I don't know the real answer to that question. I'll leave that up to you guys. But all I do know is we need to rethink about how we look at these all-star games and how we quantify whether or not certain players are all-stars and certain players are not. I wish there was some type of minimum requirements. That might be a little bit tough, but each year, year after year, if we're going to keep going the way that we've always gone, Trae Young and many other players are going to consistently be left in the dust when we are thinking about players who should be in the All-Star game because they're having such phenomenal season.